Just 2 races into the 2025 season and Yuki Tsunoda has been promoted to Red Bull, with Liam Lawson being demoted back down to Racing Bulls. Now, it's important to remember that Red Bull signed Lawson, who only completed 11 races before the 2025 season, based entirely off his potential alone and not how quick he was relative to Yuki at the time. Red Bull have had the chance over the course of the last 3 years to have all of the data on Lawson in terms of what kind of car he likes, his driving characteristics, and his relative gap compared to Max as well as Yuki. And so to give up on him after only just 2 races screams of absolute incompetence. This promotion has a lot more to do with Lawson underperforming than it does with Yuki, because when it comes to Yuki, he is in a really difficult situation where the team that had no confidence and didn't even want him just 4 months ago is now asking him to pick up the pieces and perform alongside Verstappen. When it comes to Yuki, I will be the first one to admit that his rookie season was an absolute disaster. In 2021, he looked like a driver that would never get even close to that Red Bull, because yes, whilst we could see that he was clearly fast and very talented, he was massively crash prone. Physically, he was just not at the level that he needed to be, and he also lacked composure in that car as well. However, over the course of 2022, he got his head straight, and when Gasly left the following season, De Vries was initially brought in, a driver who was 6 years older than Yuki, to basically be Gasly's replacement and the leader of the team. However, Yuki beat him. Ricciardo was then brought in after one Silverstone test as the prodigal son to basically take over from Sergio Perez, and over the course of 2 years, Yuki beat him. Lawson then came in after Ricciardo got injured, and although he was very impressive, over the course of 2 years, Yuki still managed to beat him. Tsunoda, after beating Ricciardo, should have been backed and fully supported by Red Bull that he is the guy that he had grown and matured as a driver and as a person to be alongside Max, but they undermined him and dismissed him at every available opportunity. For 2 years, they have subtly disregarded him as an option for Red Bull, vaguely justifying it by saying that he doesn't have the right mentality. Now, these comments have come from Helmut Marko and also Christian Horner, and to me, there has always been a certain amount of prejudice in those comments. His results and his progression since 2021 should have spoken for themselves, but at every available opportunity, they have either tried to find excuses or other drivers to replace him. To me, that just shows a massive lack of respect and also faith in Yuki's ability, and it also puts him in a very difficult situation now, because how can he feel as though he has the support of all of the team and also the management behind him when they didn't even want him there in the first place? Speaking about why they decided to pass over Yuki in favor of Lawson, Helmut Marko said, "I can't remember when we informed him, but it was mainly a question of mental strengths. And around Mexico, Yuki unfortunately had these 2 accidents, and Liam did very well. So it was more or less then looking at all of the facts, why we have to go for Liam." I think it's just worth reiterating that Liam Lawson is not the one making these decisions. He is not the one that chose to promote himself ahead of Yuki, and yet despite that, he is the one that has had to shoulder the majority of the hate. In Red Bull's desperation, they have now done a huge amount of damage to Lawson's reputation, and it's going to be very difficult to repair. Looking at Pierre Gasly as kind of the blueprint of post-Red Bull drivers, it is going to take Lawson at least a couple of years to repair his career and for him to become an option for other teams in the future. I just do not see him ever getting back into that Red Bull, and so the bigger problem for him now is that they're not going to bother to hang on to him and develop him and give him time. With Arvid Lindblad probably joining Racing Bulls in 2026 alongside Hadjar, Lawson basically has 22 races in the Racing Bulls to remind people of his talent and to save his career. His only other chance to get a seat in 2026, I think, is going to be with a team like Cadillac, for example. But again, he has now got the rest of the season with basically no future at Red Bull beyond that to prove to people and the world of Formula 1 of just how talented he really is. I definitely think it's important to consider the Honda aspect to all of this as well. They have been supporting Yuki as their young driver basically since he started racing in cars, and so don't underestimate the role that they had to play in negotiations in getting Yuki into that Red Bull for the Japanese Grand Prix. However, having said all of that, I just can't understate the difficult circumstances that Yuki is stepping into. he is going into a team that doesn't have the full confidence in him. He's going to have to quickly adapt to a brand new car that he has never driven before. He only tested for Red Bull once last year in Abu Dhabi. He's also going to have to get to know a brand new set of people and all of his engineers and the close, tight-knit people around him for the very first time in Japan. He's also going to be expected to get immediate results after how bad Lawson was in the opening 2 races. And given that we are in Japan and in Suzuka, Honda's home race of all tracks on the calendar, all eyes and all of that pressure is going to be on him. And if he has a bad debut, that is seriously going to dent his confidence, and it's also going to make Honda and Red Bull pretty nervous as well. Despite all of the skepticism and all of the cynicism about all of the things that potentially could go wrong for Yuki at Red Bull, I must be honest, I am massively excited to see him in what hopefully will be at some point in this season, a race-winning car. It would be amazing to see him finish on the podium, and I mean, it would be an absolute dream to see him win a Grand Prix. But when it comes to Red Bull, their logic around drivers is just confusing. If they do not want to develop their own younger drivers, then I totally understand that. But then on the other hand, they also did not want to sign an experienced and race-winning driver alongside Max either. Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso, and even Lewis Hamilton were all available for 2024 if they wanted them early on. They just do not have a plan, and they don't have a fallback option now if Yuki doesn't work out. Their lack of belief in Yuki is also now going to give them a natural excuse if he underperforms. They are probably going to blame his mentality, saying that he's not fast enough, and ultimately that's why they didn't pick him in the first place. However, the bigger problem for Red Bull is that if they can't develop their car to be more competitive and to have a wider operating window for both of their drivers, then there is no doubt in my mind that Yuki is very likely going to experience the exact same problems that Gasly, Albon, Perez, and Lawson had before him. Ideally, Red Bull now are just going to acknowledge and accept their mistake and throw their full support behind Yuki. They need to admit that their full focus is no longer on the second driver, but now fully on developing the car so that both of their drivers can extract performance out of it. They have boxed themselves into a corner, with no other drivers being available, and criticizing Yuki and putting pressure on his shoulders is only going to make it worse even if he is underperforming. They can't put Lawson back in the car because that's just going to look ridiculous. Hadjar needs at least 2 more years in RB to develop as a driver both on and off the track before he's even potentially going to be ready to survive the pressure of Red Bull. Arvid Lindblad is also way too young, and he's going to need a couple of seasons at RB as well. Out of desperation, they could call back Ricciardo, but we all saw that Ricciardo mentally just doesn't have it in him to be in Formula 1 anymore. Valtteri Bottas out of the blue could be an interesting option. He does have the experience of being a race-winning driver, but he's kind of similar to what they had with Sergio Perez. And all of the other top drivers on the grid, apart from Lando Norris, who has absolutely no reason to leave McLaren for Red Bull, are all locked into contracts for the next 2 or 3 years. Something else that I think is quite worrying is the fact that Max Verstappen, according to reports, is not exactly happy about Lawson being dropped. Essentially, Max feels like Lawson is being scapegoated by the team, and that all of this driver drama is diverting attention away from the real key issues that he has been trying to highlight basically since the beginning of 2024, which is the car's driving characteristics. The tension and toxicity that drove away Adrian Newey, I think definitely has the potential to resurface. If Max starts to feel like he's not being listened to, that the team is beginning to lose their competitiveness, their technical ability to develop out of problems, and then especially if Mercedes continue to improve and start to look more and more enticing as the season progresses, there is definitely the scenario where Max could decide to leave Red Bull. If that does happen, then that would be an absolute calamity for Red Bull because they would be left with a driver that they don't really rate, and also with a car that is essentially undrivable in the midfield. Christian Horner and Helmut Marko have made all of the decisions thus far, and their decisions are running this team into the ground. Even if you look at previous dynasties like the McLaren Senna dynasty, there was a smooth transition of power when Mika Hakkinen came into the team. Then if you look at Ferrari and Schumacher, for example, Raikkonen was able to win titles almost straight away. And even at Mercedes after Lewis Hamilton, George Russell is having a fantastic start to the season, and he is undoubtedly a championship caliber driver. This team's survival now hinges on Max and Max Verstappen only, leaving the survival of your entire organization essentially in the hands of only one person is suicide. And that is what Horner and Marko have done. They have destroyed the reputation of multiple drivers. They can't create the right plan or even support structure to even hang on to a driver for more than 2 races, let alone develop them for the long term. And that is not including the massive technical challenge that they have in 2026 of building their own power units. Red Bull, through the incompetence of Horner and Marko, are now locked into a driver that they don't believe in, who has been put in impossibly difficult circumstances with a team that he has no experience with, in a car that is extremely difficult to drive, and with a teammate who is not only the best driver in the world, but also someone who he is expected to compete against. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.